Hello and welcome to World History Unit 7, World War II in Asia. Okay, so in the last video we stopped at about 1943. We're actually going to rewind it a few years back. Prior to World War II, Europe had many colonies across all of Asia, but especially in Southeast Asia. But with France having been occupied by Germany, there was now nothing to stop Japan from conquering all of the French colonies because the French military had to be pulled back to defend its homeland. Now this aggressive expansion made the US very nervous because it meant Japan could now easily invade US controlled Philippines or Guam, which they eventually did. So the United States cut off all oil shipments and trade to Japan. And this hurt Japan, and it also made them very mad. At first, it's hard to say if they really planned to try to get America involved in the war, or if they really were going to attack US-controlled territories. But having been cut off from trade in oil from America, now they felt it was time to strike. They feared that this would be a prelude to America striking first, so they took the initiative so that they would be the first ones to strike. Now, the United States had a very interesting role during World War II because they, on one hand, still believed in isolationism and staying out of the wars, at least with troops, but at the same time they passed things like the Lend-Lease Act, which allowed them to spend money and military weapons to their allies to fight other nations, which of course would upset those nations, because even though they weren't sending troops, they were directly causing the death of the troops of those enemies. So what the Lend-Lease Act was is that under this act, the US President Franklin Roosevelt could lend or lease, that's kind of like renting, arms and other supplies to any other country vital to the United States and its security. The U.S. Navy was even seen escorting British ships carrying these U.S. arms. But America would say, oh, the Navy's not going to fight though, they're just making sure U.S. property on the British ships isn't harmed, but we're not really getting involved with the war. Hitler ordered his submarines to sink any cargo ships, including any ones that were American, because he knew, hey, I don't care if you're not sending troops or not, you are helping my enemies kill my people, and therefore you are my enemy. But the U.S. still resisted directly engaging with World War II, at least officially. On December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor was struck by the Japanese military. Within 2 hours, the Japanese had sunk or damaged 19 ships and killed more than 2,300 Americans, leaving over 1,100 more wounded. Japan had launched bombing raids on the British colony of Hong Kong at the same time, as well as American-controlled Guam and Wake Island, in one of the biggest coordinated strikes on American territories, while also sending forces to Thailand to shore up their defenses there for what they knew could be a strong American retaliation. Now, unfortunately, back in America, people took the attack on Pearl Harbor quite harshly, and understandably so. It was a great tragedy, one of the biggest in memory at the time. But unfortunately, many people took those hurt feelings, those feelings of rage and betrayal, and punished Japanese Americans for what the Japanese Empire had done to Pearl Harbor. A wave of prejudice arose against Japanese Americans in the US because people were frightened by the bombing of Pearl Harbor and encouraged by government-created propaganda to see the Japanese as the enemy. Those images in the bottom left of the screen, those were created by America to whip up anti-Japanese feelings in America to justify the government's plan to intern over 110,000 Japanese American citizens. These citizens were taken from their homes, lost their homes, taken from their businesses, never to get them back, and forced to live in camps out in the desert until the war was over, for no other reason than the fact that they were Japanese. They were American citizens, but for no other reason than because their parents or grandparents or maybe even great-great-great-grandparents had settled there. They looked Japanese, and so they were put into camps. So the day after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. officially declared war on Japan, which led to the U.S. entering World War II in Europe as well. Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle orders the bombing of Tokyo and several other Japanese cities with 16 B-25 bombers. This devastating attack led some Japanese to worry that defending and controlling a vast empire caused them to spread their resources too thin. We're going to talk later about the dropping of the atomic bomb, and as terrible as the dropping of the atomic bomb was, the bombing of Tokyo was actually much more devastating and killed way more people than even the atomic bomb did. But Japan was not an easy target. There are those who argue that between Japan and Germany, Japan was a much greater threat. Militarily, they had the same technological advances, they were great strategists, but they also had this unwavering belief that their emperor was actually a face of God. So much they were willing to sacrifice themselves, commit suicide as a way of getting into heaven for the glory of their nation and their leader. And these attacks would be known as kamikaze attacks, in which the Japanese pilots, once they ran out of ammo, would sink Allied ships by crash diving their bomb-filled planes right into them. They wouldn't just go back to refill, they would crash their planes directly into the ships to sink them. This was a very difficult tactic to fight against, because it was very hard to shoot those ships out of the air so completely that they'd miss. So when America finally did retaliate, they placed General Douglas MacArthur as the commander of the Allied forces in the Pacific. He wanted to island hop past Japanese strongholds, seizing islands that were not well defended but closer to Japan, because that was the goal. Get right to Japan, take out major cities like Tokyo and Nagasaki and Hiroshima, try to bypass getting bogged down in wars on the islands against an enemy that was well entrenched and equally as powerful. And these kamikaze attacks were the result of a new kind of naval warfare introduced in the Battle of Coral Sea. Instead of ships firing at each other, they released fighter planes that attacked each other and the enemy ships. Because of those kamikaze attacks, in this battle, America suffered more losses than Japan, but were able to successfully stop Japan's advancement. And now, the timelines between the war going on in Asia and the war going on in Europe finally converge, and in our next video, we will see the conclusion of World War II. Thank you, and if you have any questions, let me know in class.